welcome to Coffee and Communications, the Impact Cast. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, and I am delighted to be welcoming Anna Ong today, who is the founder of What's Your Story Her, and also the creator and host of What's Your Story Slam. So obviously with this podcast, the aim will be for you to find out much more about them as we go on. But first thing first, how are you, Anna?
I'm great. It's a nice Wednesday, lazy Wednesday, I would like to say, but it's not.
Yeah, well, I think even though it's a public holiday here in Singapore, as a entrepreneur, you tend to never have holidays. Is that right?
No, you have to really be conscious and mindful about taking time off. And so, yeah, every day seems to be like, yeah, you still got work to do.
Yes, I think that's just the life you choose when you move from kind of corporate into entrepreneurialism. So I'm going to kick things off. Probably the best way to start is, can you to tell me a bit about your background and kind of what led you a little bit to kind of where you are today?
Okay, so I would like to call it my mid. So, well, my friends would say it's a midlife crisis, but I would say it was probably like a moment of truth when I decided to quit my job. So I was a banker until 2016 when I decided to quit my job and move to South America to learn Spanish and dance. Oftentimes people would say like it's an eat, pray, love moment, like channeling Julia Roberts, because I remember Mark, you like your movies, and but except I just chose South America instead of going to Bali instead. I decided to just give myself that year to just do whatever I want and not think about the future or not make any plans. And it's through this disconnection, like being able to disconnect from the world of banking and the corporate space, that I was able to explore. And it led me to the path of comedy, exploring the field of comedy and storytelling. And there is something about leaving a corporate job and not having a fallback plan that kind of pushes you to just move forward and try new things because you got nothing to lose because you've lost whatever it is that you've already built.
And so it's really interesting because I think one of the things that people who are listening who are entrepreneurs, it's like it's not an easy thing to take that dive. A lot of people can be in a corporate job and can be like, oh, I really wish I could start my entrepreneurial journey. But actually, most people are hamstrung and never do that. So how did you find either the strength or the moment just to say, I am going to do this? You're going to follow your instincts.
I think it comes to the point where you realize that you're wasting away. So that was where I felt like I was doing okay career wise, but I wasn't very motivated to go further ahead because I was getting paid more than enough, and I had a great lifestyle, but it just felt very empty. And at some point, you're trying to look for passion and purpose. And I realized I don't know what my passions are and I have no sense of purpose. And so I quit my job in order to find that passion and purpose, that thing that just makes me light up or gets me out of bed every morning instead of just curling up and makes me work during public holidays because I love what I do.
So how, and this is another jump, and I think for everyone listening, I've got to know Anna, like just over the last couple of months, and I mean, it's not a surprise for me when you say comedy because I've got to know you and you're a funny person. But again, comedy is sort of feels very random within, like, it's not often you go from corporate to finding yourself a little bit in South America, and then the next step is comedy. Like, how does that happen?
It came by true accident. Actually when I explored comedy in San Francisco, but only because I wasn't happy with all the jobs that I was interviewing for. So I went one night to see a stand-up comedy show, and in stand-up comedy, it's always very male dominated. And you don't really get to see that many female comedians. So I was super excited when I saw there's a female comedian in the lineup because I don't see that many women. But I was so disappointed with her set because I felt that her jokes were all below the belt, and I think that we we don't have to go below the belt to
Yeah.
be funny. I think I found it very insulting, and I started heckling her, and I was getting more laughs from the audience than she did. So I thought to myself, well, if this is the bar for comedy, then I might as well just do comedy because one, I'm prettier, and two, I'm funnier.
That's a great story. So I suppose You do comedy. You're doing sort of different things within that. So what then sort of led you a little bit, like thinking about your journey to Asia, Southeast Asia, and sort of like before we dive into exactly what you're doing at the moment, like kind of what was that transition there? What led you from comedy then to kind of come over to Southeast Asia?
Okay, so basically, I signed up for comedy school as a joke, and I got into improv and storytelling because improv, all you have to do is just show up. But I never knew what improv was until I signed up, until I actually went to an improv class, and through improv, I found the world of storytelling. And when I was in the US, I started telling people like, "Oh, I'm a storyteller." I got startups asking me like to help them with their stories, like like how do we craft our founder stories. So what on my way to so I was doing that in the US and I had a friend's wedding in Bali. So on my way to Bali, I swung by Singapore. And while I was catching up with my friends and telling me them all about my adventures in the US, one of my friends pointed out to me, why are you doing it there when you can make a much bigger impact here in Asia? We need it more here. You're Asian and you're showing that Asians can be great communicators using your hacks. So why are you not doing it here? And that got me thinking. So I started uh, a separate company here in Singapore in order to, promote better communications using storytelling and improv.
Well, that's a perfect segue into like I said at the start of the program, you have like obviously they're interconnected, but you have your consultancy, which we're diving into now, and then we're going to go into a little bit the event you host, which is a very popular and very fascinating event, especially kind of the way I think you formulate it and run it is very interesting, very different, which probably puts more work on you, but also at the same time means that the quality and what people take away from the event is higher than sort of a lot of other things. But before we don't go into that, can you tell us a little bit about you started your consultancy, kind of what type of thing you do through that consultancy?
So I do both coaching and corporate training in terms of like how to be better communicators. So for example, I work with leadership teams in terms of not in terms of being able to confidently tell their story and be comfortable with being vulnerable. I realize here in Asia, we don't like showing our vulnerability because we see it as a sign of weakness. But when we own our vulnerabilities, it's a sign of strength because we accept ourselves and all the less perfect bits of ourselves. And in a way, it becomes sort of like an armor because why would you it's because someone asked me this like why would I want to show my vulnerability when someone can then
Hmm.
strike me, but then when someone strikes you when you show your vulnerability, you know who your enemy is head on, versus isn't it better to find out who's coming to attack you versus seeing this stab behind the knife
Yeah.
marks behind your back years later.
Yeah. So,
uh,
so
so yeah, I find vulnerability invites people to come to you when
mhm.
they resonate with you, and also gets your, I guess, if ever you have enemies, to show themselves.
And how, like, other than sort of people having to, and I agree with you, I think it's very fascinating you say that the concept of kind of, I think even generally throughout the corporate world, as you rise through the ranks, showing vulnerability has always been like a perception that that's weak. And I think especially for women as well, like you have to double down on sort of not those traits in order to be successful. That's the perception. So outside of that, like what are the other challenges do you often find with kind of C-suite and executives when trying to help them kind of find that kind of inner storyteller? Like, what are some of the things, and how do you work them through that?
Well, first one is like just getting them to see the value of spending a few hours with me working on their stories, because they were like
Hmm.
most of them like, why would I need to help in telling a story? But I mean, anybody can tell a story, but not everybody can tell a story well. And
Yeah.
what I work with leaders is how to be very concise and succinct in telling their story, and to be able to capture their audience imagination with their words in the shortest amount of time. you know that guy, like that person who goes on and on and on when you ask them about like, tell me your story, and
Hmm.
they'll tell you 30 minutes later he's still going and you don't know where the story is going. I work with leaders on like how to cut it down to 3 minutes. So when you meet someone, they introduce themselves, they give you all the relevant points, they take you to a journey and leaves you wanting more. And maybe there are different aspects that you want to know, but at least through those 3 minutes, you get to see who they are, why they do, what they're passionate, what gets them going.
Interesting. And do you ever um, are you ever surprised by how amenable people end up being once they see the value of it? Like, because obviously you're still trying to get people to do something they're not very comfortable with. Yeah, the amount of times you probably hear it is, "But I'm not a storyteller," or "My story is not very interesting." Like all of those different tropes. Like,
Yes. You'd be surprised by how many people would go like, "Oh no, my story is not that interesting. There's nothing special." But when they start telling you something about themselves, something personal, I always say like, "That's what makes you unique, and that's what makes you special." And through the stories, when you start working on your own stories, you start to see what you bring to the table, what makes you unique, what makes you special. In one of my corporate training and for a leadership team, one of the team members told me, "Anna, I knew more about her in the 15 minutes you had me exchange stories with her than the 11 years we spent working
yeah,
side by side." And that's the power of stories, like because especially working on your own personal stories, that you get to share a piece, something that not a lot of people get to see in the everyday setting or even the corporate setting. That and when you share it, people feel that they connect with you because they got to see what's behind that
yeah.
window.
Interesting, fascinating. And so you take your kind of corporate stuff and storytelling and you create something, I suppose, which is kind of like between your like events that you would do kind of in the US and also your obviously corporate stuff about kind of storytelling. So tell us about like what's your story slam because it's fascinating.
So yeah, so What's Your Story Slam is a storytelling competition. It was inspired by the story slams in the United States. So when I moved back here to Singapore in 2019, I missed the world of storytelling, and I literally would schedule my work trips to the US around the shows that I'll be in town so that I can compete in the story slams. And I would go to open mic nights here in Singapore with the comedy open mics because they can say that, "Oh, Anna, storytellers are welcome." But they're all stand-up comedians, and storytelling and stand-up comedy are different in some ways because in stand-up comedy they expect you to
Hmm.
make them laugh. They expect a joke. So they take it by surprise when I'm telling a story because like, "But where's the joke? You're not being funny." I go, "I wasn't trying to be funny. I'm just trying to tell a story." Uh, and and like I think I explained to you before, storytelling is a not so funny version of stand up. So when one of my friends got tired of me complaining about it, so he just told me like, "Well, why don't you just start your own show? What's stopping you?" Which is true. So, other than the fact that I've had zero experience in events management and absolutely no idea about entertainment, but other than I know how the stories work as a performer, I've seen it. So, if you know what, we'll just swing it. Have half big idea, and I just went for it. So, found the venue, went to the projector where they told me like, "You know what, we were just talking about storytelling, and then you showed up." So it almost like everything was aligned. So yeah, so I started my first event in July 2019. It was a social experiment to see whether people will like storytelling here in Singapore. I asked my friends to perform because nobody volunteered, and so I asked my friends who I thought had interesting stories, and I asked them to trust me in the process that I will help them craft a good narrative out of their stories. So I coach everybody. And like I told you, nobody goes up on stage without going through me. I have to do the quality control. So I coach everyone. And the first night, the first show, they all tell a story. And during intermission, people were telling me like how much they loved it because it was the first time for them to see people like they normally would know either in a professional setting or even like as friends, right? Like talk about something more personal, something that has more depth and more meaning. And was what
Hmm.
to the audience they're watching it, they feel connected even though they don't know the person, but there is that sense of connection and community that night. Like oftentimes here in Singapore, we don't really like to mingle with other people. Like, I mean, even like the
Yeah.
safe distancing thing, if you don't really know somebody, you don't talk to them. But at that time, during my show that night, people were just talking to everybody. They don't, it's like, it's like suddenly
Yeah.
everybody's your friend, even if it's just a friend that you haven't met yet. And I thought that was like one of the most beautiful feelings, and so that inspired me to continue on producing shows. And we were growing from growth to growth until the pandemic. We pivoted, and then
Yeah.
you know we're opening up. We pivoted again, and now we're trying to figure out where to turn.
Yes, I think it's yeah. There are only so many pivots you can do before you start kind of going around in circles. So yeah, I was going to say, I mean, obviously the event side of things, especially, have obviously been impacted massively by COVID, because obviously the power of what you do is obviously those in-person events. And can you tell, yeah, can you just explain? Because I think people have got probably quite tired of the amount of like. I think there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, I've done online conferences, I've done online WhatsApp workshops. To be honest, they're just not as good. The future of work is some remote working, but it isn't all, because events generally just don't work the same. Can you tell, kind of maybe give your thoughts on why the power of in-person stuff is a lot
I
better?
think because when we meet people in person, there's an energy exchange. People bring a certain element of their selves. Like like when you meet someone, do you like their vibe or not? Because we're all made of different levels of energy, and I think uh, when you're doing it virtually, the energy exchange, there is still energy exchange, but it's very very muted because you have like so many filters between the camera and the speakers, versus when you're meeting someone in person, it's almost instantaneous. Like all the nonverbal cues you get to pick up. I think that's the power. I can't explain it. Like I would just say, like whenever you do in-person event, there is a certain energy in the air. Like for example, when I was doing my events, I had a corporate client who wanted to buy 200 tickets to bring all their staff to watch my show, and I turned them down. Other event producers stood there like, "Are you nuts? Why would you turn that down?" Because I go, I only want people who want to be there, be there.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be a mandatory event. So I told the client, I'll give you 50. Because at least then one out of four who wants to be there will put their name up, because then they're there. And then they will, because if I have someone there who's forced and it's just like, sitting there, like crossing their arms, that's not the energy I want to bring in.
Hmm.
I want people to be engaged and excited.
Yeah.
And and that night, despite having like a client, a big corporate client present, there was such a buzz in the air. Like everyone still talks about that show, because that was like, where, they go like, it's like the energy and the excitement is just palpable. Was it that palpable?
Yep, that's the word.
Yes, and my friend, one of my friends who was visiting from London, he was late, so he was just hanging out outside the show, and he said that, Anna, I was watching the door, nobody was leaving. Like some events where people kind of like trickle
Always.
out. He goes like, nobody was trickling out. I just knew the show was over because suddenly there was like a wave of people just leaving their room.
That's awesome. And I agree with you. I think even when I do any kind of event, the feeling I would get when I finished it in person, and even if it's a bit of a boring, like even a workshop where, not every workshop's going to be the most amazing one you've ever done, but I always feel like a definite sense of achievement. There's at least one or two people, even if you've had a bad go in the room, who find it very valuable. I often find when you're doing things virtually, it's very cold and very robotic. And even if people get value out of it, you don't, even if they say, well done, I really enjoyed that, you don't get the same sense of energy, and you can't read that energy from them. And so I take away a lot less from the virtual events than as someone who hosts them, relative to sort of when you do it obviously in person. So yeah, I completely agree. So just kind of taking a step back to kind of the storytelling stuff. Why is storytelling so important, generally, and also just with a lens when it comes to kind of businesses and business success?
Well, so okay, so let's just divide it into different parts, right? So why is storytelling important?
Hmm.
I think storytelling has been in our DNA since I guess since humankind was born, that's how we learn. We learn through stories. Our brain is wired to like structured events, and storytelling is a series of structured events. Cause, effect. This happened, and then this happened. In the simplest forms of storytelling. So storytelling is mostly how we learn, how we entertain ourselves, and how we connect with one another. And back in the olden days, when it was like, when people travel in herds, how you protect yourself. You
Hmm.
protect yourself through stories. Um, in terms of the second part of the question is, how is it relevant now, or is it to business?
I think it's how is it relevant? Like if we were to look at the business world,
Okay.
why is it so important that businesses, both big corporations and actually, a lot of the work we do is like, or from my side is startups. Like, why is it so important for them to be able to storytell?
So for so let's talk about it in the business context in general. Storytelling is important because this is a way for you to get your message across. Studies have shown that facts and data wrapped around the story get the 70% retention rate versus bullet points. I mean, you can present the same information, but as a bullet point, it might go over people's head because that's a lot of things being memorized. Whereas when you're telling it in a story, you give the context as to where you're coming from, why is this important, what are you doing, what are you doing about it, or what the solution is, and how does this
Hmm.
benefit you. You're able to really wrap it up into a tight package, and you're able to paint a scene, an idea in the mind of your audience. Stories invites people to go on this journey with you. They get to see things from your perspective. They get to uh, empathize even. So you can use stories to persuade and influence. In the startup world, a founder stories can be seen as asset. A founder story, why they set up the company in the first place, what motivated them, what inspired them, gets relatability, gets engagement from investors or from future employees. Like, I will follow you to the ends of the world because I
Yeah.
believe in your vision, because they get to put themselves in your shoes. And oftentimes in the startup world, I the ideas that they have is untested. Venture capitalists, they invest in the people
Hmm.
behind the idea, not the idea itself,
Yeah.
because it's still not proven. So but they believe in the people. And how do you get them to believe in you? Through your story.
Interesting. I think that's a great point to make. That great storytelling, especially for startups, has an impact in so many different ways, and it's often something they, we all understand startups. Startups have so many things to do. Like they've got small amount of staff and they're all running around. So you're both the CEO, CTO, CIO, kind of accountant. And in that rush, they often forget to keep going back to the mission, why they're doing what they're doing. And I'm often very surprised sometimes when I sit down with startups. Like I sometimes have fantastic startups who are able to tell passionately why they're doing what they're doing. But I also have others who are like, even the founders are probably not even on the same page about why they're doing. So it's something that I've always, and I love the fact that you always reinforce it, that they should always be going back to like the kind of why, because it's their most powerful story. So in terms of like, what are some of the common mistakes you actually see being made when people are telling their stories? Like, what are some of the traps they fall into, and that you try and rewire them a little bit in order to not kind of do those things?
When they start their story with, so I'm going to tell you a story about. So when they go with that line, or like, hi, my name is so and so, and this is, I'm going to share with you a story about, I go, you just lost me. I'm already cringing because I think when we start, kind of like when we're giving a speech and we're running a presentation or a workshop, we have or hosting a show, telling a story. The first minute or the first 30 seconds, depends on who's telling you about this public speaking skill, is the most important. You want to be able to capture, engage
Hmm.
your audience. You want to get their imagination. So don't waste it by saying, I'm going to tell you a story about, and just say, like, it was a cold,
Yeah.
dark night. Then so that we already know, something's
In,
happening.
t- in, term, in terms of
Good.
storytelling, then, would you also how would you structure, just so people have a little bit of an idea about sort of, is it would you structure storytelling, both your corporate story, your personal story, similar to kind of how a book or a movie or whatever is structured? Is it the same sort of thing?
Yeah, I think like most of the, for the most part, 80% of stories out there follow the traditional narrative arc, the plot line that we learned in English class when we were in school. It's still the same thing.
Yeah,
Set up the context, the background, establish the characters, talk about the inciting incident or whatever was the conflict, and then the events that happened along the way. And then oftentimes the climactic moment is whether do you or do you not achieve your goal, or if you have to make a choice, which way do you go? So oftentimes the hero either goes into the fork of the road, or or whether it's like success or failure,
hmm,
and then the resolution. That's a very standard uh, in every movie or show we've seen. Most for most part, 80% of them follow this
yeah.
structure.
Interesting. So, bit of advice for anyone listening is to next time you watch a movie, just kind of consider if it's a good movie, because I've seen some terrible movies recently. So, but that's for a different podcast I do. But yeah, when you're thinking of it, just kind of think about like how they're doing this, how they're, like you say, setting up the story, the characters, and think of your own kind of way you're telling the story. Is there any like techniques people can, like little, like, obviously we want them to come and use your consultancy, that's the best way to get this right, but is there any things
Yeah,
they can do, like just little things they can do themselves to actually help kind of craft these stories?
I would say like to tell better stories, you have to listen to stories or watch more stories told. Because oftentimes there's so many people who don't bother. They go, I want to be able to tell good stories, but they don't really bother checking out how do other people tell stories. Because I find that you can learn so much by watching and listening to others. And oftentimes, like even in my class when I'm teaching, I don't showcase my own stories. I use other people's stories because there is something I go like, oh, he did this really, really well. He structured his story really well, and I think we should learn from this example. I use my stories to deconstruct because then at least what people will then ask me, so what's your thought process when you did the story?
Hmm.
So I think like kind of like if you want to be a good filmmaker, you have to watch a lot more films, right? So, and most people, if you want to tell better stories, then watch how people tell stories, like watch how they do it orally. Another thing is like, well, one, remove those lines. My story is about, and just go straight into the second paragraph. Normally, that's when the story really starts. So when I was 5 years old, or something like, oh yeah, so I woke, so I opened my eyes sleepily, and I was just looking around the room, and I realized this isn't my hotel room. So, grab your audience attention.
Hmm.
Try to, I guess, three parts: engage the audience, uh, show the struggle, show the struggle in terms of telling the story, and then show the change.
Okay. I think that's great advice, and I think also it doesn't come easy. Like you say, like anything in life, you need to practice and you need to learn from other people. So when you're at events, like I think it's just very easy, even in person when you're at conferences and things like that. But like, do pay attention to when you're seeing people do pitches or demo days, or like the way people are like, and learn from some of the better ones. Like, don't just kind of, I think we're all kind of guilty of this, where we kind of switch off and we've attended an event without actually attending the event. But you can learn so much from other people, and actually being a great storyteller and really telling your corporate story is about practice and it's about learning from others. So talking about you a little bit, sorry, it's a Wednesday cough. Talking about you a little bit more, like obviously with COVID, but I think just kind of with all the changes you've gone from the US, you've pivoted, you've started something new, you've come to a different kind of geography. What are some of the things you've been surprised about yourself, in terms of that you've learned about yourself in terms of your entrepreneurial journey? And what are some of the ways you've kind of overcome some of the challenges? And like, is there something you can kind of share with us that other people maybe could learn about when they're hitting barriers when it comes to kind of being an entrepreneur?
Oh, so many different things. I think so. For me, my advice to anyone who's looking to go into an entrepreneurial journey, do it be not for the money. I find myself eating my own words because I remember thinking about like yeah, why would anybody want to do that? But you have to have a higher purpose than just making money when you're going to start your entrepreneurial journey, because it's not going to be easy. Uh, there will be times, especially when you're doing it by yourself, that you will end up questioning yourself. Am I on the right track? Am
Hmm.
I, like, am I really doing this? Because I found myself last year asking the same question during the pandemic, when everything I've done just suddenly kind of disappeared, right? Uh, I was supposed to have all these corporate gigs, and then I was supposed to be doing these shows, and then suddenly I was supposed to go to the US, and then suddenly everything's gone up in smoke. And I was forced by the pandemic to also pivot and move to the virtual sphere. If anyone was going to tell me that I'd be teaching storytelling and improv virtually, I would have said, like, yeah, that's totally not
Hmm.
doable. But it is actually now. I even perform improv on Zoom. So it does, like, it forces you. It's like, as an entrepreneur, when your back is against the wall, do you crumble, or do you stand up
Yeah.
and fight your way out through it? And if you really believe in what you're doing, you fight your way out. But if you're not particularly convinced, and you only do it because, oh, it's a great way to make money, this is opportunistic, then you probably might go like, okay, this is about the time we cut our losses and move on to the next thing. Which is also, there's no judgment there, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have made lots of money because of all these
Yeah.
opportunistic things.
It's yeah, I was going to say, as an entrepreneur, definitely don't go into it to make money, because especially at the start, even if you've got a great idea, you're going to spend a very long time not making money. That's just going to be the fact. I
Correct.
think we often look at very successful entrepreneurs and go, "Oh, that must have happened overnight." But, like, if you actually listen to any of the stories, you often find that it takes years and years and years of, like, it not really working, and little chance happenings that kind of help you kind of make that big step, and all that kind of thing. So yeah.
And you tend to develop a thicker skin. As an entrepreneur, you have to be able to feel comfortable in putting yourself out there and being able to handle rejection with grace.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
I, 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 I've had, like, I think when I first started, I've had so many doors shut in my face that, but now some of these doors, they're the ones like calling me and says, like, hey, hi, and I'm okay. So, so it's yeah, so it has to be still be, you have to take everything, I guess, graciously,
Yeah.
and realize that not to take things too personally. It is, though it is very hard as an entrepreneur when you're very much tied to your work, especially when you think of your business as your baby. Any attack on your business, you see it as a personal
Yeah.
attack on you, like a mom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think yeah, you've kind of got to get very used to, like you say, like you still care passionately, but you've got to get very used to just like every day as an entrepreneur is an email that's not responded to, is someone who's meant to come through for you, or a contract that's signed, and you've got all those things that I think when you're in the corporate world would be major things. You've almost got to go, there are at least going to be three or four things today that are going to go wrong, but the thing that goes right is going to be so much more important for my future moving forward anyway. And I think it also allows you to reconceptualize what's important, and what, when things are good, to actually really consider them as good. Because I think, again, in the corporate world, you just kind of get very used to existing, and you like,
Correct.
so the ups and downs don't tend to matter as much. So yeah, I think it's very important in that sense. So to
Yeah.
kind of close off a little bit, because whenever I talk to
Mm-hmm.
you, it always goes very, very quickly. I kind of
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
wow, it is.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to, so what does the kind of future look like for you? I mean, obviously predicting it, especially with the pandemic, is very, very hard. But maybe kind of what is your hope for your work, and especially I think in terms of your storytelling, where would you like that to be in a year, 2 years time?
Well, I mean, I still have a view that I'm gonna go global, but right now, I see this point, this time. Uh, I consider Singapore as my incubation playground, where I get to incubate my ideas and refine it and perfect it before we go and
Hmm.
launch overseas. Uh, I think we will have to continuously be versatile and adapt to the changing condition. And whenever we're doing anything that involves people, because this pandemic is far from over, you will always have to be able to adapt, to think about like what is the contingency plan. How can you do it with this all the safe distancing measures? In fact, one of the things that has surprised me over this revised lockdown that we have, or I don't know, quasi lockdown, is the fact that I'm not upset about. I'm like I've taken it with a sense of humor, and I'm pretty chill about it. Whereas last year it would have
Yeah.
been the end of the world for me, and this I was like I go like. Ah, yeah, you know what? There's no stress. So, I go, okay, so we can't do it in person. We go virtual. But for my show, because people do want it, oh, I can't have 100. Okay, then we'll have to split it to 50. So like when I deal with regulators, they ask me all these questions. I go, okay, then we'll
Yeah.
just do this. That's fine. I can do this. We can work around this. And what surprised me also is, or actually what I'm pleasantly surprised by, is how helpful
Yeah.
the regulators are, because they realize that we're in this together and we're all just finding a solution that works for both, for that
Yeah.
will work for both of us. They want to make sure that everyone's safe, and I want to make sure everyone's safe too. But and so they still want me to have my event. I also want to have my event, but then they also have like these are our guidelines, and so we're learning to like how can we work together in this. And I was very pleasantly surprised by how open they are to working together and helping brainstorm. Sometimes you're the ones giving me suggestions.
That's fantastic. I actually, yeah, two very quick things before we go. I think, firstly, just for your event,
Hmm.
so when you've got one coming up, anyone that's listening and says to themselves, but I don't have a story that's interesting, like, what would you say to people in order to kind of encourage them to take a chance or kind of maybe think about kind of attending or be part of your event?
So most people think when they come to my show that they have to tell a story on stage, which is a misnomer. I would
Yeah.
invite you to go come to the show and check it out and listen to stories. And oftentimes you'll be surprised by how inspired you are, because when you hear other people's stories, it triggers something in your memory about, oh my God, something similar like this happened to me too. And then you end up wanting to tell that story.
Yeah.
So my goal when I started the show was also to inspire people from the audience to realize like I could be one of those people up there, or I want to tell stories like that too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that's again goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is there's nothing like learning from other people is also a great way of just understanding you also have value. And yeah, it's the like every day there's 24 hours in a day. Everyone has so many things that are stories every single day. But I think if you're not used to the practice of thinking of them as stories, you don't really you're not really used to kind of turning them into something that actually people
Yeah.
want to listen to. But actually, most people have, even in like often at the moment, you meet people in because of the pandemic, and they're like, "Well, life doesn't really change." But actually, like, then what are you doing 24/7? Because that's a lot of hours for nothing to happen. So it's kind of not true. It's just I think people get into a mindset where they convince
Correct.
themselves that kind of nothing's really happening. So I just wanted to end actually just with just a general open thing. Like, if is there any other advice, especially I think to startups or people on their entrepreneurial journey, like any kind of other piece of advice? I think you've already done a great job of like giving some sage advice about kind of working through stuff as an entrepreneur. But like as they're listening right now, what would you say to people in terms of things that you remember just to keep yourself going?
I often ask myself is why I do what I do, and the most important thing is why it matters. Why is what I'm doing? Why does it matter? Why does it matter doesn't necessarily mean why it matters to others. As long as why is it so important to me? Because when you're telling stories, it's similar when you're trying to convey an idea, whether you're giving a speech or a story or a presentation. As long as you care so much about your topic, other people will care. Oftentimes, people who come and check out my show, they told me, I have zero interest in storytelling. I was just curious, why do you talk about it with so much passion that I had to
Yeah,
go watch it?
that's very very true. And just because I think it's relevant, what's your favorite? Or what's your favorite book and what's your favorite movie? I'm putting you totally on the spot. I did not tell Anna I was doing this before, but for the sake of storytelling,
Oh God, I feel like I'm gonna get some judgment from you right now. Okay, but my all-time favorite
Okay.
movie is White Chicks. Have you not
We're going to
seen
talk
White
about this
Chicks?
after we finish the podcast.
So I love White Chicks. Like I will stop whatever I'm doing whenever White Chicks is on
That's
and
with
just watch it. It
the
is,
bro- the
it's two black guys who
yeah
pretend to be white
the
girls.
brothers. I can't remember what they're. Yes.
Yes, that one. And in terms of book, okay, so so many books. I love so many books, but one of the books that um, I love is one is
Hmm.
Milan Kundera. What was this? The
Yeah.
Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Okay, so I'm glad to. Well, why? Firstly, actually, before I jump in, why that book? What is that? Why does it mean so much?
I think there is something about just that I thought he has some like lots of witty lines there, but I thought there's just something about um there's a
Yeah.
poignancy to that story about relationships, about being married to someone and yet loving somebody else. There is something that I actually also like Janet Winterbourne's um, shoot. Uh, Written on the Body. That's also one of my other favorite books. And I think it's because they
Hmm.
have like such quotable quotes in this book. So like for Milan Kundera, um, he has this line called like, "What is flirting? It's the promise of sex without the
That's a
guarantee."
very good line.
That's brilliant. And then and in the Janet Winterson's Written on the Body, the very first line of the book says, "Why is the measure of love lost?" And I
Interesting.
thought like that was just like such beautiful words.
Yeah, no, fascinating. I'm so glad that your book taste is better than your movie taste,
Oh
by the
yeah.
way.
Hey, I watch movies for entertainment value. I read books to feed my brain.
Okay, okay. Well, we can have a discussion about this after the
Yes.
podcast. No, but all joking aside, and I really want to thank you for joining us today. There were so many things I think people can learn from this. I would honestly, I think, I mean, we're both in similar fields, just doing slightly different parts of it. And I think the power of storytelling is super important. And I'm so glad that it's become more relevant and people have kind of tuned into it more the last few years. I think especially because just the way media now and digital media requires you to kind of be able to tell stories. So I'm like delighted, and people should definitely check out your consultancy, but also check out her show when
My
she's
show.
able when she's able to do it next, because it is fantastic and people love it. So and yeah, just kind of go along as Anna says and sort of have a look and realize that's actually for you, or maybe it isn't, but at least kind of take it in and kind of see. So thank you very much, Anna.
No, thank you for having me. It was super fun. Can't believe like time just flew by.
Yeah, it always does, and I've got to be
Yeah.
when I have a really good guest, I often have to be like, oh, I've got to cut it because no matter what, people love it, but they're not going to listen for an hour and 20 minutes or anything like that. So, but I will definitely have Anna on again because I think, especially maybe around when you're doing your shows again in person,
Yes.
maybe I could do one. I could come along and then we can discuss it afterwards because I would definitely like to kind of talk about that in a little bit more depth. But anyway, thank you,
Oh, thank
and
you.
thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.